Hey everyone, I'm so delighted that you're joining me for episode 88 of the Beyond MD podcast. I'm a few days late, but we are starting Beyond MD Book Club today because some listeners have told me that they really want me to recap some of the best books that I've been reading. Today's book is The 5 Types of Wealth by Sahil Bloom. Before we dive into the book review, I think some of you may have heard by now that I am running in the election for a position on CMPA Council. So I do believe there is true alignment between the CMPA's mission. So the CMPA offers general support and medical legal advice to physicians to help us work with a clear mind. And there is alignment with my own mission because I am striving to help my colleagues live their best lives today. And I really feel that a potential opportunity to work with the CMPA would allow me to continue having a broad-based impact on my colleagues across the country. So the vote is ongoing until April 23rd. I will post a link to the vote in the show notes. You need your CMPA number, but it will take less than a minute to do. And I just want to say that for people who have reached out to me during this time to support me, I'm telling you that during my journey on Beyond MD over the last 5 years, you guys have reached out to me at times when I least expect it, but when I most need it. And I want to say that I don't take this for granted. I really appreciate your support, and I really appreciate all of you. And just a reminder for everybody to please vote for their physician leaders. And if you feel like I'm a good candidate, I'm so grateful for your support. So let's get into the book review. The 5 Types of Wealth by Sahil Bloom is truly one of the very best books that I have read on what it takes to live a balanced life and a truly rich life. So quick background on Sahil. So he started his career in private equity when he was living in California, and he was told that if he stuck to this path, by the age of 30, he would have everything he needed. More money than he could have imagined, the dream house, the dream car. But the thing is, he didn't feel fulfilled. And it was on one evening when he was having a deep conversation with a close friend where Sahil learned some gut-wrenching math. He was across the country from his parents who were in their mid-60s. At the time, they were only meeting up once a year. And his friend quickly concluded that Sahil would only see his parents 15 more times in his life. This is what prompted him to make changes, to leave his job, move across the country. And this forced him to really re-examine the scorecard that we tend to use to measure success in life. It's a scorecard that is almost solely based on money. And Sahil says that this scorecard is broken, and I couldn't agree more. Sahil decided to talk to people from different walks of life, professionals, tradespeople, elders, and people who had lost loved ones, and he asked them, what does it take to live a successful and meaningful life? They talked about things like proximity to family, building memories with loved ones, living a life full of curiosity and community, and living a life of health and longevity. No one seemed to emphasize money. Now, when it comes to proximity to family, I have a lot to add here because when I first started work, I wasn't able to get a job in Ontario close to our families. I started working in Alberta as a radiologist, and I can say there were benefits to Alberta. Our mortgage was only $2,700 a month. My income potential over the long term would probably have been higher in Alberta as well. But there was one very key non-negotiable that was missing here, and that was proximity to family. We were only seeing our family 1 to 2 times that year we were in Alberta, and at a time in our lives when Seema and I were raising family, this wasn't going to cut it, and so proximity to family was a non-negotiable. So for people who are deciding where they're going to be living, there's a lot of factors at play, but I think there will often be 1 or 2 non-negotiables that should drive a lot of your decision making. But we need to be clear about one thing. Money is still important. Money is still the enabler to success in different areas of our life. But Sahil argues that while money is something, it's not everything. And he encourages a 5-pillar approach, which is time wealth, social wealth, mental wealth, physical wealth, and financial wealth. Before we dive into each type of wealth, I want to raise an important point that Sahil discusses in the book. He says that our life evolves in different seasons. For example, when we are in our 20s, we are typically gaining knowledge and skills alongside classmates and friends, and we are typically active and quite fit at that stage in our lives. So, in our 20s, we tend to focus on social, mental, and physical wealth, whereas between the ages of 30 and 50, This is when we are working a lot more, we are raising a family, so therefore we're going to be prioritizing social and financial wealth. In a time like this, it can be tempting to let go of something like physical wealth altogether. But Sahil says instead of turning things on and completely off, we should adopt the dimmer switch mentality, meaning that small actions, even if we can make time for a 10-minute run, a 10-minute walk, small actions in physical health will compound over time and go a long way. So we don't need to turn that type of wealth off completely, but we can put it on dimmer mode. I thought that was a really interesting way to think about this framework. So let's dive into time wealth. Sahil does have a set of questions that you answer at the start of each section, and you give yourself a score out of 20. My time wealth score was only 11 out of 20. I recognize that while we're working, I'm turning 41 this year. These are my peak working years. It's hard to have all the time freedom you want, but let's tackle this nonetheless. Sahil defines time wealth as the freedom to choose how you spend your time, who to spend it with, where to spend it, and when to trade it for something else. There are a few real and shocking stats that we need to cover here. So, time with your parents will drastically decrease after the age of 20. This is often when people are moving out of the house. And when you start this phase of your life, you need to be aware of how often you will be able to meet up with your parents and your family. And we need to be present in these moments, and we need to cherish these moments. Time with our kids typically peaks between age 30 and 50, but Sahil encourages us to recognize the reality that there's only a 10-year time frame where we are everything to our children. I refer to these years as the golden years. And Sahil says that there will be a last time for every moment. A last time when you tuck your child into bed, when you read them that bedtime story, and when you get those hugs. 2 nights ago, I was with my son Zion at his house league hockey banquet, and in the middle of the banquet, he approached me for a hug. And he wanted that hug, he gave me a hug back, and I realized there's going to be a last time for that, and I'm very aware of it. He encourages us to think that the best days for many of us are happening right now. Time with friends drops off a cliff after school ends. This is very, very true. And as we move on in life, I think we need to really embrace the quality of relationships over the quantity of relationships. And we need to start investing time into these relationships early. And we need to know who will be there for us during our darkest hours. Time spent with our partner increases until death, which is why who we choose to navigate life's challenges with is the most important decision we will make in our lives. Time with our coworkers is usually at a high between the ages of 25 and 60, which is why Sahil argues it's important to surround ourselves with coworkers who raise our energy. And time spent alone increases with time, which is why Sahil believes, and I agree, that we need to be gentle on ourselves. We need to speak to ourselves with a positive and reassuring language, and we need to embrace those moments when we have nothing to do, stillness, and we have time alone with our thoughts. So there are 3 principles here under time wealth that Sahil discusses, and let's tackle them one by one. The first principle is awareness. We need to be aware of the passage of time. We all have an hourglass, and the most striking pictorial of this is the Mori calendar, which is basically 80 rows of 52 weeks, and each week is a circle. 80 rows because we assume that the average lifespan is around 80 years, and each week that passes, you have to shade that circle. And so when I look at my Mori calendar, I'm turning 41 this year, it's just past half done. That to me is striking. It means that I have only 40 summers or so left. And I can tell you, with that knowledge in mind, I will be spending a lot of time in the garden this summer. There was one investor by the name of Duncan Graham, and he coined a term that I love. He said that early in life, we are time billionaires. When you're 20 years of age, you have about 2 billion seconds to live, assuming you live to the age of 80. And when you're 50 years of age, you have 1 billion seconds left to live. We are time billionaires. Let's make sure we use our time in the right way and intentionally, because time is ticking away. The second principle under time wealth that Sahil discusses is attention. Sophie Leroy is a professor of business who mentioned a term in her paper called attention residue. This term describes what happens when we shift our mind from task A to B. What happens during task switching is that it takes our mind time to completely leave task A and to fully orient with task B. What does this mean? This means that constant task switching in a day will eat up valuable time. I talked about in my productivity episode that Gary Keller, author of The One Thing, he estimates that we waste up to 28% of our workday with task switching. So how am I fighting back against this? What I try and do now is to work in 1 hour focus blocks. If I'm working at home, I will often follow this up with a walk, and then only after the walk will I allow myself to look at my phone. The other thing I do with my phone is I turn off app alerts so I'm getting less notifications. And then what I'm doing for email is I'm setting up 2 short designated windows a day to check my email. Recall in my productivity episode, I talked about Cal Newport, who discussed the importance of deep work. Deep work is when we are using our knowledge, skills, and expertise to drive value. And to do so really requires an understanding of our key areas of focus. I'll go over mine, and maybe this will prompt everybody to think about theirs as well. So my first area of focus is clinical radiology. This allows me to care for patients. It allows me to help my referring physicians. It allows me to earn a living, and if I do so efficiently, I can make time for my kids. So one priority I have for myself and the kids every day is I drop them up and I pick them up from school. I realize I am fortunate to do it, but it's become a part of my fabric. My second priority is radiology education. This is an area of expertise for me, and I love to teach trainees and other physicians. Teaching raises my energy, so I've made it a priority. Priority number 3 for me is curiosity. I strive to read 1 to 2 books every month, and I'm also a very passionate investor. I also started an investing club. These are activities that keep me curious and raise my energy. And then priority number 4 is I want to help others live a rich and meaningful life today. That's why I continue to do Beyond MD, and that's why I'm running for the CMPA. The argument here is to focus on inputs that maximize your outputs. And hopefully, if we get into the habit of doing this, the argument is that this will hopefully lead to principle 3, which is having more control over our time. A few exercises that you can consider practicing that may help you put all this into practice. One comes from the interaction that Warren Buffett had with his pilot, Mike Flint, and Sahil summarizes this in the group. Mike one day told Warren that he was feeling discouraged about life, not clear on his purpose and goals. Warren told Mike to write down 25 things that he had on his mind and that he wanted to accomplish. Mike did it, and then Warren made him circle 5 and cross out the remaining 20. Warren told Mike that the 5 things that you have circled, these are going to be your areas of focus, and the others that you have crossed out, you are going to avoid these at all costs to minimize distractions in your life. It's a great exercise. I tried this for myself, and I encourage you to try it as well. And if new opportunities come your way, perhaps look at this list that you've come up with and see if the new opportunity aligns with your list of priorities. The other exercise that I've tried, and encourage everybody to do so, is to go through an energy audit. I learned about it in this book and also in Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. But for 2 weeks, write down all the activities that you're doing and then highlight each activity in green if it raises your energy, in yellow if it's energy neutral, and in red if it is draining your energy. The goal here is to focus more of our time and efforts on the green. We want to outsource the red and probably delegate some of the yellow. People ask me how I outsource things. I follow the energy audit. This is why I still garden, because gardening elevates my energy. And this is why I will from time to time outsource snow cleaning. And as Dan Martell says, we need to focus on doing things in life that light us up. Okay, let's move on to social wealth. Now, in this section, my score was 18 out of 20, a lot higher than time wealth. A lot of you will be familiar with the work by Dan Buettner in Blue Zones. So he studied pockets of centenarians around the world and tried to decipher what are the common themes between these populations. It turned out that one of the most common themes was rich social relationships. And there's a lot more evidence behind this. So Harvard ran a study on adult development that began in 1938, and they followed the subjects for almost 80 years. Psychologist Robert Waldinger in this study found that the greatest predictor of health at age 80 was in fact relationship satisfaction at age 50. When it comes to our families, you can rewind back to episode 44, my first conversation with Dr. Matt Pointer. He realized that he was getting to a time in his life where his kids would eventually be 18, they may move out of the house, and then time with them would fall off a cliff. This is what prompted him and his family to embark on an 11-month magical journey around the world. Let's remember that the golden years, where we are everything to our kids, is 10 years maximum. It will go away in a blink, and we need to savor these moments. We need to be present, and we need to give these years the respect they deserve. One of the things that I have done recently is I have given notice that I would like to eventually go down to 4 days of radiology per week, because I want to make sure that I have the time to give my best self to the people in my life that matter the most to me. When it comes to family and kids, Sahil says something interesting that's made me think really, really hard. He says, based on his own experience with his father, that you should involve your kids in your work from time to time, and you should let them in on the journey. This will help your family, and especially your kids, to understand your why. It will help them to strengthen their connection with you and your work, and who knows, it may inspire them to do the same. One thing that I do from time to time at home is I will bring the kids into the office when I'm reading x-rays, and I'll get them to try and spot the fracture or the pneumonia. I can tell you they are always interested, and they in fact do quite well. I'm also thinking about from time to time sneaking the kids into work this summer. We'll see how that goes. Seema thinks I'm a bit crazy for it, but I'll also try to bring the boys to a few talks this summer. Maybe they'll leave inspired. Maybe it will spark some curiosity. There are a few key principles under social wealth that Sahil goes over, and let's talk about them now. The first one is depth of relationships. So deep relationships come with time spent. They come with deep, challenging conversations where you will be sharing truths and providing honest feedback. These are the hard moments, Sahil says, that make the relationship grow, and this is what results in us finding our darkest hour friends. One key point is that these relationships are only going to be around later if you work on them now. And this brings me to my past. So my medical school friends and I, we started going on golf trips in 2010. We did well and followed it up in 2012, but then there were some 5-year gaps. And in 2022, we decided we were going to make a pledge to make sure that every other year on the even years that we would have a golf trip, catch up and connect. And I have to say, the core 4 of us, so my friends Jed, Jason, Patrick, you guys have been amazing. You guys have committed to the process, and I can really feel the bonds growing. The second principle under social wealth is breadth of relationships. So this is a connection with a larger group of people. You're typically not going to be as close to this group of people, but this connection will result in new knowledge and new conversations that you may not have had otherwise. It could open up new career and networking opportunities. And I have to say, looking back at my own journey, I feel like Beyond MD has done exactly this. It's given me a form of community, and it's really helped me to expand my network. And this is something that I will always be grateful for. The next key principle that Sahil talks about is differentiating earned status versus bought status. So we all know what bought status is. You buy a house, you buy a car. That's maybe a type of status that can be achieved through purchasing. But earned status is very different. This is the respect and admiration that people have for you based on the work that you do and the qualities and values that you bring to the table. This cannot be bought. Sahil mentions a great quote by entrepreneur Naval Ravikant, who says, quote, "A fit body, calm mind, and house full of love. These things cannot be bought and must be earned." At the end of the day, Sahil's argument is that true social wealth comes through consistency, hard work, and showing up every day. And I couldn't agree more. The last concept I want to touch on is around marriage. And Sahil talks about some interesting information brought to light by a psychologist, Dr. Gottman, who had been studying couples for decades, and he outlined 4 types of communication that often resulted in divorce. So the first thing is criticism. Criticism is when you make a clear verbal attack on the other individual. Second is defensiveness. This is when you protect yourself and you fail to take accountability for your actions. The third type of poor communication is contempt, when you are attacking the other person's character. And the fourth type of poor communication is stonewalling, when you completely shut down and you back away from the conversation. So sometimes it can be difficult to know exactly how to proceed in a conversation. And one principle I like to stick to is Charlie Munger's inverse principle. You may not know exactly what to do, but if you know what not to do, so that is to be critical, be defensive, show contempt, and stonewall, that's what you shouldn't do. And now go ahead and do the exact opposite. And all of this takes me to a beautiful article that I read many years ago. I don't remember the author or where I read it, but the message was this: you marry someone because you are so interested and invested in enhancing that other person's life that you will put them ahead of yourselves. And I think this brings me to one other topic of reframing. So we all will have challenging moments. A good marriage takes a lot of hard work, but you always want to examine a situation from the other individual's perspective. You always want to put yourself in the other person's shoes before you make your comments. Okay, the next type of wealth is mental wealth. And in this section, I scored 16 out of 20. I think mental wealth is very underrated and underappreciated. And there are 4 core principles that Sahil goes over. Let's discuss them now. The first one is curiosity. Curiosity is you questioning how the world works and you wanting to learn as much as you possibly can. My view, and this is on my experience, this is not innate. This is acquired, because I can tell you growing up, I was not an avid reader. And in fact, I was afraid to ask questions. But I decided in 2020, things had to change and that I had more to bring to the world. I was also really eager to learn more about financial literacy, share what I learned, and I also wanted to inspire my kids. On the topic of kids, kids are the most genuinely curious people on the planet, and we have a lot to learn from them. In fact, as we move on in our life, it's important to understand why our curiosity may fall. So when we enter the real world and we start to work, Sahil argues that we begin to become more comfortable with how things work, and there's less of a need to take on risk and to move outside our comfort zone. I see this all the time. And in fact, one of the most dangerous statements that I hear at work is if I ask somebody how it's going, and this happened every day in my residency. There was one person who I would talk to, and every day I heard the same answer. Same old, same old. Guys, I'm telling you right now, you do not want to get to a stage in your career where you are treating every day as same old, same old. That can be a sign that you are bored, that you are not growing, and that maybe a change is necessary. On this topic, one of the changes I decided to make to grow and challenge myself, I decided to learn nuclear medicine at our hospital because we needed coverage. Fortunately, I had an amazing friend and mentor, my colleague Ali Lechtman, to guide me through this process. But I can tell you that being a student again, it has really lit something inside of me. And I think that that can be a great way to continue growing and developing in the workplace. The second principle that Sahil talks about is purpose. Purpose is your vision and how you want to create meaning in your life. Dan Buettner, in his study of the Blue Zones, found that purpose was also central to these groups of centenarians. Andrew Hallam, in his book Balance, talks about purpose as one leg of the four-legged stool. There are different frameworks that people will use to talk about purpose. The most common one is Ikigai. I will take the financial part of Ikigai out, just like Sahil does in the book, but basically your purpose revolves around activities that combine your passion, your interest, and a need for the world. This is similar to Jay Shetty's discussion of Dharma in his book Think Like a Monk. And for people who are trying to find out what their purpose might be, there are 3 questions that you could consider asking yourself that I found useful. It is, who are you trying to help? What problem are you trying to solve? And how are you going to do it? So for me, I'm trying to help my physician colleagues live better lives today, and I'm doing it through my podcast and perhaps some other resources down the road. The next principle, after curiosity and purpose, is growth. I love Sahil's definition of growth. This is the pursuit of improvement, chasing our limitless potential with no defined end. A perfect example he cites is Benjamin Franklin, who did so much. He was a screenmaker. He was responsible for America's founding documents, created the lightning rod and bifocal glasses. He was a perfect example of how breadth can be beautiful in life. And how do you make this happen? By exercising your curiosity and showing a thirst for knowledge. My saying is that as long as I have my curiosity, there is never a dull day. On this topic, there are a few inspiring quotes. Jeff Bezos, in his last shareholder letter, he said that the world wants you to be typical, and don't let that happen. You need to work to find your distinctiveness. And Mahatma Gandhi has one of the best quotes of all time. He says that live as if you were to die tomorrow, learn as if you were to live forever. The final principle in mental wealth that Sahil talks about is creating space for yourself. You need to give your mind some time to wander. I have found that for myself, my best thoughts happen when I am showering, when I am walking with no cell phone stimulation, when I am walking in nature, gardening, and best of all, when I'm flying on a plane, not connected to Wi-Fi, no interruptions. These are the times when my best ideas happen. Sahil also reminds us that some of the most successful people in life carved out dedicated blocks of time to think. Bill Gates was famous for his Think Weeks, where he would take off to a cabin, he would have a private chef, and for 1 week he would just read and reflect and journal and be alone with his thoughts. And he found that these were the weeks where a lot of progress was made at Microsoft. So I would recommend everybody you don't have to take a full week. Most of us can't do that. But even if you have an hour in a day, create time for yourself. Maybe it's in the morning, maybe it's late in the evening, to be still with your thoughts. Give yourself that space. And I tell you, your best ideas will emerge in those moments. Okay, we are almost there. Type of wealth number 4 is physical wealth. Now, this is an area where I scored 15 out of 20, and this has to do with my sleep. Let's dive into it. It's really easy for us to think that while we are working and grinding, we can leave the exercise until later. But the thing is, small actions when it comes to exercise also compound over time. That flight of stairs that you took yesterday, that set of squats that you did the day before, all of these are going to contribute to you hopefully dancing at your 80th birthday. Peter Attia, in his incredible book Outlive, he says that exercise in his mind, and the data also suggests this, that exercise is the most important tool that we have in our kit for a long and healthy life. When it comes to physical wealth, there are 3 key pillars here. The number 1 is movement. We need to move and we need to build muscle mass. We know that sarcopenia, so a decline in muscle mass, begins in our mid-30s and it really falls off a cliff in the 8th decade. And there's thinking now that skeletal muscle being our largest organ system, it's not just helpful in us building stability and reducing falls as we age, but that it can also play a role in glucose metabolism and promote better health for our brains. The second pillar in physical health is nutrition. We want to keep it really simple here. We want to focus on unprocessed foods and reduce processed foods. So, interesting story. I love eating roasted edamame because it gives me a lot of protein. And we ordered some from Amazon recently, and it was quite shocking. The basic pack of edamame has 2 ingredients, which is edamame and salt. But if you look at the flavored packs, there are about 15 to 20 ingredients in each. You know you're having a lot of processed food there. So nowadays, I'm actually keeping an eye out for the ingredients when I eat. Under nutrition, the most important macronutrient is going to be protein, and we can really sum it up with Peter Attia's quote from Outlive, where he says that good nutrition will help you less than bad nutrition will hurt you. And his whole point here is that nutrition is important, but in his mind, not as important as exercise. Now let's get to pillar number 3, which is sleep. I think sleep is so critical. Unfortunately, I've struggled with this a lot of my life. A lot of it has to do with me being a very light sleeper. But there's evidence to show that good sleep helps us with focus, concentration, mood regulation, and may even be preventative against dementia. So some of the things that I'm doing now, and fortunately my sleep slowly is getting better, but I am sticking to a bedtime routine where I go to bed at 9 o'clock, I read, no phone allowed, and then also we are promoting darkness, blackout curtains, and then eye covers. These actions are helping me a little bit. There used to be a saying that nothing good happens after midnight. My new saying is that nothing big or productive happens after 9 p.m. Let's move on to the final type of wealth, and that is financial wealth. I scored a 17 out of 20 here, which brought my total score among the different types of wealth to 77 out of 100. Clearly some work to do, but life's a journey. So John D. Rockefeller, business tycoon, was once asked, "How much is enough?" And he responded, "Just a little bit more." Sahil argues that we need to find out what our definition of enough is. And until we have that definition of enough, we will unfortunately never be able to reach financial freedom. Now, there is a parable involving a fisherman and an investment banker that Sahil shares in the book that I just have to share. And this talks about our definition of enough. A wealthy investment banker goes on vacation to a tropical fishing village. As he walks along the docks one afternoon, he comes upon a small, rundown fishing boat with several large fish on its deck. "How long did it take you to catch those fish?" he asked the fisherman. The fisherman looks up from his work, smiles at his new visitor, and says, "Only a little while." The investment banker is shocked by the response. He likes the fisherman and wants to help him. He says, "Why don't you fish for longer so you can catch more fish?" The fisherman shrugs and explains to his new friend that he has all he needs. "Each day I sleep late, fish a little, and spend time with my children and beautiful wife. In the evening I go to town, drink wine, play the guitar, and sing and laugh with my friends." The investment banker is puzzled. He wants to help his new friend who, in his opinion, is clearly confused. The investment banker has helped many businesses and has an MBA and other fancy credentials, and he says to the fisherman, "First you need to spend more time fishing so you can catch and sell more fish. Then you use the proceeds to buy a bigger boat, which allows you to catch and sell even more fish. Then you buy a fleet of boats, you hire a team, you vertically integrate. As a CEO of a large growing enterprise, you could move to the big city. You would take your company public and make millions." The fisherman looks confused but smiles and says, "Then what?" The investment banker laughs and says, "Well, then you could retire to a quiet town. You could sleep late, fish a little, spend time with your children and beautiful wife, and then you could go into town in the evening, drink wine, play the guitar, and sing and laugh with your friends." The traditional interpretation of this story is that the fisherman is right and the investment banker is wrong, but Sahil's interpretation is that we each have our own definition of enough. We need to understand that, embrace it, and use that, because without it, we don't have the ability to reach financial freedom. Sahil's wealth formula is quite simple. It is having a stable income, which most of us have, to make sure that the expenses are less than income, and hopefully this gap slightly grows over time, and then to invest the difference. Now, the power of compounding has to be discussed here. And we talk about the story of Warren Buffett. He met Benjamin Graham at age 24. At age 56, Warren Buffett had his first billion. And then by age 94, he had a net worth of $165 billion. Think about that. In 32 years, he made his first billion. And then in 38 years after that, he had made more than another $160 billion. That is the power of compounding. And Charlie Munger very wisely says that the first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. The last thing I'll mention here is returns on investments based on hassle. So returns on the y-axis, hassle of different investments on the x-axis. The simplest investments that we can do are basically exchange traded funds and index funds. And then basically for every step in the following direction, we have a lot more hassle, but maybe no to only a slightly increased return. So compare index funds to stocks that are passively managed, stocks that are actively managed, and even a real estate portfolio. Right, guys, I invest in real estate, and I will say that the returns over the long term will probably be slightly higher than my ETF portfolio, but think about the amount of time and hassle that I've had to put in. And I can share so many stories over a drink or a coffee, maybe another episode, but knowing what I know now, It's a good asset class, and I'm glad that I've diversified, but would I do it again? For me, there's too much hassle for only a slightly more added return. And I share all this because I think for a lot of us, we need to pick our sweet spot on the return versus hassle time spent spectrum. And if we find our sweet spot, I think that can make us more consistent with our investing. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I highly recommend you check out this book in its entirety. There will be a link in the show notes. Let me know what books you are reading, and I will see you in a few weeks' time. Stay well, stay savvy.